The first sign that something had gone fundamentally wrong was not the explosion. It was the screen in Northern Command. The tactical display that was supposed to show a battle one layer at a time began filling with too many inbound tracks too quickly for the architecture behind it to solve. Interceptors were launching, batteries were responding, the system was doing what it had been built to do, and yet the picture kept getting worse. That is the image I want you to hold in your mind, not the headline, not the casualty number, not the political spin that will follow. A room full of professionals watching a defensive system function exactly as designed and realizing in real time that design itself had become the problem. That is the real story here. The real story is not simply that Iran fired 300 Khyber-Shikan ballistic missiles. The real story is that a 15-year strategic bill arrived all at once over the rubble of Northern Command and the collapse of 5 brigade formations as functioning combat organizations, a truth that Washington and Tel Aviv spent years trying to manage around, has become impossible to hide. No finite shield can permanently protect a force if the adversary spends long enough building a strike package sized specifically to overwhelm that shield. That is not a slogan. That is the central axis of this entire event. If you understand that, you understand why the language coming out of official channels sounds so cautious, so incomplete, so evasive. Institutions do not like admitting that what failed was not courage, not discipline, not readiness in the narrow sense, but the framework through which they understood the threat. Yet that is exactly what this looks like. Iran did not stumble into a lucky shot. It did not hurl missiles into the dark and happen to hit something important. The target package itself tells you this was the product of patient intelligence work, aimed not at buildings in the abstract, but at the operational logic that turns buildings, brigades, communications relays, logistics hubs, and air defense coordination centers into one functioning Northern military system. That is why the phrase 5 brigades destroyed has to be handled carefully. Destroyed does not mean every soldier vanished in a fireball. It means the chain that turns men, vehicles, munitions, orders, and situational awareness into a coherent fighting formation was cut in enough places at once that the formation no longer exists in operational terms. A brigade that cannot receive orders, cannot coordinate movement, cannot restore communications, cannot sustain logistics, and cannot tell higher command what still remains is not a brigade in any meaningful military sense. It is personnel and equipment trapped inside broken architecture, and once you see the event that way, the next question becomes unavoidable. How did the most sophisticated layered missile defense network available to any American ally allow enough missiles through to wreck that architecture on this scale? The answer is uncomfortable precisely because it is not dramatic. The answer is mathematics. Iron Dome, David S. Sling, and Arrow are not fake systems. They are serious systems built with serious money, serious engineering, and years of operational refinement. The problem is that even the best defensive system in the world does not escape the logic of capacity. Every intercept consumes something finite. Every launcher has a magazine limit. Every battery has an engagement rate. Every reload cycle creates time. Every engagement computer has throughput. When 300 ballistic missiles arrive across the compressed window, the question stops being whether your system works and becomes whether your system can work fast enough, wide enough, and deep enough at the same moment. That distinction is the entire battle. In other words, this was never only a story about Israeli vulnerability. It was a story about an intercept ceiling. That is the framework word that matters here. Intercept ceiling for years. Israel and its American backers built the best layered defense they could. For years, Iran built a salvo designed not to defeat every layer individually, but to push the total engagement burden above the combined ceiling of the whole defensive architecture. Once you understand that, the event stops looking like a freak shock and starts looking like the result of 2 long investment cycles finally colliding. Israel invested in defense against the threat model it understood. Iran invested in offense against the limits of that defense. That is why this night matters. The Khyber-Shikan itself sits right at the center of that longer story. What matters most about the missile is not the mythology around it, but the design logic inside it. Range that pushes launch positions outward, terminal behavior, meant to complicate intercept prediction, guidance architecture built to reduce dependency on the exact vulnerabilities American and Israeli planners long assumed they could exploit. Warhead design aimed not at spectacle, but at the destruction profile required for command infrastructure, relay nodes, logistics hubs, and hardened operational centers. This is not the weapon of a state improvising under pressure. It is the product of a state that spent years asking one disciplined question: how do we build a missile for the world our enemy actually created? That question leads to another one, and it is one Washington has never been comfortable answering in public. How did Iran build something like this under sanctions severe enough that Western institutions kept assuring themselves such sophistication should have been impossible? Part of the answer lies in patience, part lies in technical borrowing, part lies in the ability of adversaries to learn under pressure faster than institutions weighted down by procurement cycles, oversight layers, and legacy assumptions. Russian inputs in trajectory optimization and ballistic physics matter. Chinese inputs in signal processing and navigation matter. The long afterlife of the RQ-1 170 capture matters, but the deeper issue is not any one foreign input. The deeper issue is that the American defense establishment kept clinging to a mental model in which sanctions automatically translated into technological stagnation. That assumption did not just age badly, it helped shape a policy culture that consistently downgraded the speed at which an adversary could adapt. And adaptation is the hidden protagonist of this entire story, because what happened last night was not created last night. It was created by years of asymmetric adaptation on one side and years of institutional inertia on the other. That is why the strike feels bigger than the physical damage alone. The physical damage is severe, the symbolic damage is worse. Once a defensive system's upper limit becomes visible in combat, everything built politically on the myth of its indefinite sufficiency starts to wobble. That is why the ceasefire question now matters so much. A state seeks a ceasefire when leaders conclude that continued fighting is more dangerous than stopping. It may still posture, it may still threaten, it may still talk about punishment and restoration. But beneath all of that language sits an underlying judgment about trajectory. The trajectory is what matters. If Northern Command and 5 brigades were hit at this scale under a single engagement window, then the question inside Israeli and American planning rooms is no longer just how to replenish stocks. It is whether the next round can be prevented from proving the same point more brutally, and that is where the decision tree tightens. Israel has a few visible options, and none of them are clean. It can ask for accelerated replenishment and emergency interceptor resupply. That helps, but it does not erase the ceiling that just became visible. It can intensify direct strikes in an effort to punish Iran's launch infrastructure. That is possible, but it runs into Iran's broader retaliatory architecture, the one built precisely to make escalation expensive beyond the immediate theater. It can seek a ceasefire while publicly framing that move as tactical prudence rather than necessity. That may be the least bad option, but it also amounts to an admission that the old theory of controlled pressure and manageable deterrence has broken down. Washington faces its own tree. It can accelerate weapons transfers and intelligence support. That will happen. It can raise the rhetorical temperature. That will also happen. But the truly decisive option, direct American action against the missile production and storage ecosystem that generated this strike package, runs headfirst into the very deterrent Web Iran spent years building: Hormuz pressure, regional base exposure, proxy activation thresholds, wider economic consequences. What matters here is not whether the United States can hit harder. It obviously can. But what matters is whether it is willing to pay the second order and third order costs that would follow capability. And willingness are not the same thing. They rarely are. The gap between them is where deterrence lives. That is why this night extends far beyond Israel. Russia will study this as a lesson in how saturation, patience, and targeted destruction of command architecture can bend an American-backed system without requiring symmetrical parity. China will study it differently, not only as a military lesson, but as a geopolitical one. Every visible crack in American security guarantees enlarges the diplomatic room available to Beijing as a mediator, financier, and long-game architect of alternative order. Regional states will study it through yet another lens. If the most heavily defended American partner in the region can absorb a strike package like this, then what exactly are the promises underneath their own security assumptions worth in crisis conditions? That question will not go away after the headlines move on. In fact, it is only beginning, and that is why the mainstream version of the story will be so misleading. The mainstream version will ask whether 300 missiles got through, how many were intercepted, what the immediate casualty figures are, whether a ceasefire is close, and whether additional batteries can be rushed in. Those questions matter. They are not the deepest ones. The deepest question is whether the institutions that produce this strategic situation can admit that the problem was not merely an intelligence miss or a bad night. The problem was a 15-year refusal to update the conceptual model fast enough. That is a much harder admission to make, because once you make it, you have to revisit everything. Procurement assumptions, threat hierarchies, diplomacy escalation ladders, the way adversary capability is measured, the way sanctions are interpreted, the way political leadership is reassured, the way deterrence is publicly sold. You have to admit that what looked like stability may have been a long interval of misreading. That is the bill that came due, not because Iran suddenly became 10 feet tall, not because Israeli defenders forgot how to fight, not because one night erased the balance of power. The deeper truth is more dangerous than that. A long period of institutional underestimation met a long period of adversary learning, and the collision finally became visible over northern Israel. You can already see the temptation in official language to shrink this back into something manageable, a severe strike, temporary degradation, urgent replenishment, robust support, continued deterrence. These phrases are not meaningless, but they are designed to stabilize political space after a shock. They are not designed to tell the whole truth. The whole truth is that once an enemy proves it can size attack packages above your defensive ceiling, the old comfort disappears. From that point forward, every future confrontation starts under a darker shadow. That is why this is not just a missile story, it is a reckoning story. The reckoning is not about whether Iran has capability. That question has now been answered in operational terms. The real reckoning is whether Washington and its partners possess enough self-awareness to build something genuinely different from the assumptions that led here. If they do not, the next engagement will not simply repeat this one. It will arrive on top of everything this one already taught. And once a lesson like that is learned by every actor in the region, it does not unlearn itself. A shield does not become strategically weaker the night it fails. It becomes strategically weaker the moment everyone sees where it ends.